I have an incredibly powerful interview for you now. Charlotte Hennessy is the daughter of one of the victims of the Hillsborough Disaster. Her father was amongst the nearly 100 Liverpool fans unlawfully killed at the 1989 football match, and her story is almost unbelievable. She spoke to me in the wake of the findings of the final inquiry into the 1989 Hillsborough disaster being published on Tuesday. It found the police responsible for the disaster, though none will ever face real justice. If you want to see our piece on that story, the link to our full show is in the description. For now, here's Charlotte's story, which began with me asking her to tell us about her father and the circumstances of his death.
My dad was Jimmy Hennessy. He was 29 when he died at Hillsborough. And I was 6. I was an only child. My dad was just about to become a self-employed plasterer. He'd worked for Ellesmere Port Town Council previous to that. And he was quite good at it, to be fair. Even now, like the smell of plaster or Artex reminds me of my dad. And I, up until a couple of years ago as well, I still had his ladders. But we had to get rid of them because of house moves and stuff. But he was really proud of, who he was. He was very popular. He was a mod, with all the attire and his own Lamboretta. And he was a really good guy. A massive Liverpool fan. He went to home games, away games, was a season ticket holder, and he just lived and breathed Liverpool, really. So I didn't know the full extent of what had happened to him until the Hillsborough Independent Panel released their report. Obviously, because I was so young, I was 7 a few weeks after he died, so I didn't have access to all of the information that other family members had within that time period between the disaster and 2012. And my mum had always tried to sort of protect me from it. And it wasn't really her place either to investigate what happened to my dad. That was down to, his mum and his sister who took on that role. So when the Hillsborough Independent Panel released all the information, that was the first time that we'd had access to anything. And we were one of the 41 families that were recalled by Dr. Bill Kirkup because they stated that they had found evidence that there was reason to believe that my dad was one of the people that could have survived. So within a few days, we went and met with him. They were very good, they didn't keep us waiting long. So we went to meet with him, and that's when he had said that the original death verdict must be untrue, because he had examined all the evidence that had been gathered in relation to my dad, including his pathology report. And they had stated that my dad had died due to traumatic asphyxiation, but the presentation of him, and things like quite personal, intimate things like the weight of major organs and the presentation of his lungs and things, didn't match that cause of death. So that was devastating for us, because that was new information. It wasn't something that we were prepared for either. So that then is where the real sort of uncovering, if you like, of what happened to my dad began. We had access to all statements from police officers and, documents and things. So I used to sit and go through all the HIP reports and specifically try and find things in relation to my dad. And that is when we discovered that he was found behind the goal on the pitch, lifting his arms, very much so alive. A police officer said that he attended to him with a St. John ambulance guy, or who he believed to be a St. John ambulance guy. And they'd taken my dad to the gym to get him medical attention. That's where they thought that there was going to be medical professionals. Unfortunately, after Dad was put in the gym, 2 other police officers came along and put him in a body bag, assuming he was dead, but he wasn't. He was unconscious. And so following that, 3 hours later, The police officers then went to search my dad for identification. And so, bearing in mind he'd been in this body bag now for a considerable amount of time, 3 hours, it's quite long. And they noted that he was hot and had vomited. So they didn't tell anybody this. They didn't escalate it. They just searched his possessions and then zipped the body bag back up. So sadly, my dad's cause of death is very different to others because he died as a result of the inhalation of copious amounts of stomach content, and was completely savable. It was sheer negligence and ignorance, really, as to what killed him. And so, thankfully, the new inquest, gave him the truth and the correct verdict, and we've now been able to have the correct death certificate for him, which I think is really important. And so, I think one of the biggest challenges was that the two police officers who tended to him in the gym and put him in the body bag and then searched him for identification, they didn't disclose any of that information until 2013 when the Operation Resolve went to speak to them, because obviously, an inquest is extremely important in gathering a person's last moments. So initially, one of them was quite elderly, one of them wasn't so elderly. I think one was in his 40s, and he initially started to engage, and then Operation Resolve went back to speak to him the next day, and he refused to cooperate any further. And then he sent a letter via his doctor to say that he was too unwell, and he has then, therefore, since then, refused to give any further answers. Even when I reached out and said, I appreciate that this is very traumatic for you, but it's just equally as traumatic for me to learn 25 years later that actually my dad didn't die the way that, the establishment, if you like, have insisted that he did. So please, just on a personal level, could you just explain a few things to me? There's answers to questions that I need that I'm now not going to get because you're refusing to cooperate for the inquest. And I was told no. And they were able, both of those police officers were able to opt out of giving evidence at the inquest. They didn't cooperate with Operation Resolve. They didn't cooperate with the IOPC. And so on that basis, that I just thought it's so morally wrong. But surely somewhere as a police officer, you're failing in what is expected of you within your duty. So that's why I then made I made 2 official complaints to the IOPC in relation to the report that was released yesterday, because I felt that 1, they were grossly negligent, and 2, their behaviour fell short of what is expected of a police officer because they refused to engage with me, even, outside of Operation Resolve. And the IOPC did not uphold my complaints, and those 2 police officers have never been informed about them to preserve their mental well-being.
So, first of all, just I'm so sorry that you lost your dad at that age, and then you've had to sort of learn all of this horrific information throughout your life. I suppose for clarifications, there were 12 former officers who this IOPC report has said would have cases to answer for gross misconduct were they still to be working for the force. Are these men who seem to be responsible for your dad's death? Are they among those 12?
No. They've never. So those 2, they were police constables, and they've never been investigated fully because they refused to cooperate. So there's absolutely nothing that the IOPC can do in relation to them.
Wow, that's absolutely shocking. Talk to me about how this whole experience has affected your life, because obviously people have been campaigning for justice and the truth for 36 years. Obviously, this is the vast majority of your life falls in that window. How has the long struggle for justice for those who died at Hillsborough, how has that affected your life?
I don't know any different. I think as a child, I grieved, as any other child would have. But it was very difficult because initially, in the weeks after Dad's death, the likes of the Sun journalists would wait outside my primary school because I was daughter of and a local family in Ellesmere Port. So they would wait, they would hide behind cars. So my mum would have to take me to school late and pick me up early to avoid them. And then, we moved very quickly to North Wales. I think we moved house by the August because my mum just couldn't bear it anymore. And so lots of things changed. So Dad died in April 1989, and by September 1989, I was away from family, lived in a new house, started a new school, and I found it very, very difficult. By high school, sort of 93, 94, I would get picked on. There would be times, where maybe something significant was happening and I would be aware of it, but wouldn't really fully understand what it was. Just, like, for example, the Stuart Smith scrutiny. I knew that something was going on, but I wasn't old enough to pay, an ample amount of attention. But then, there would be children in my year that would go home and their parents would be saying things. And I've always been that little girl whose dad was killed in the Hillsborough Disaster. That's how people used to refer to me as well. So it has been challenging. As an adult, I think I'd had so much time throughout my teen years to research and access information online that as an adult, I was just so prepared. I was ready. I had all the info. I remember being in college and we had to do a presentation to prove that we could, show that how good our PowerPoint skills were. And, some of the girls, we were doing childcare. So some of the girls did, the Montessori way of childcare, and they did these presentations. Mine was on the Hillsborough Disaster, and I just used to, because I've always had that burn, I suppose, that passion. Whereas now as an adult, I do sometimes feel sad for my own children because this affects them as well. I was in London last week. I was in Liverpool yesterday. It's consistently on the news. My 16-year-old's head teacher asks him, what's your mum up to now? And they don't mind too much, but you do feel bad.
And this IOPC report, one of many reports over the years, do you feel like you have any kind of closure now? I mean, what's your response to the contents of this particular report? Obviously, lots of people very disappointed that, it's too late for there to be consequences for people. These people would have faced gross misconduct charges if they were still working. And because so much time has passed, they won't do. But so what could you summarize your response, I suppose, to this IOPC report?
I think that the IOPC report is thorough. I know that is not how some family members feel, so I do only speak on behalf of myself. I think it's thorough. I think it's really comprehensive. It's very easy to follow. It goes right through the history from, previous matches and the history behind the ground, and Sheffield Wednesday Council's involvement in the safety certificate. I was quite interested as well in how well South Yorkshire Police knew that ground and the input that they'd had on the structure and removal of certain things and their concerns for safety. That I found very interesting. The IOPC have uncovered new police statements that have also been amended. So that takes that total now to well over 330-ish, I think. And they also discovered that Assistant Chief Constable Jones, that he had, despite having multiple opportunities for various, like, for example, for the Hillsborough Independent Panel, He had the opportunity to hand over any of his personal policing documents then and to Operation Resolve, and he didn't. So that was very interesting. There are elements of it that are disappointing, but I think a majority of us were realistic that we were always told, the IOPC were always very honest, as were our legal teams, that there would never be prosecution because of the passage of time and because of the legislation that was in place at the time that prevents them from being convicted. However, for me, it was about the moral side of it, that we've always known the contents of this report. Now it is there in black and white. Everything that family members and survivors have always said and always known is there in a report that has been investigated thoroughly. But like I say, that is just my opinion.
And in terms of sort of what's changed between 1989 and now, I suppose up to and including the Hillsborough Law, which seems like it's going to be passed soon, that would mean that public servants who deliberately cover up state-related disasters could face up to 2 years in jail under the new Hillsborough Law. How much do you think things have changed? You're clearly someone who's sort of researched, thought an awful lot about this. Do you think that a similar event to the Hillsborough catastrophe and its cover-up could happen in Britain in 2025?
Yes, and it happened with the Manchester Arena bombings. Look at what the police did there. They minimalised their involvement and tried to cover up where they had made blunders, and that was 2017, was it? So it is happening now. COVID, look at what the COVID inquiry just last week, the second report into the COVID inquiry is damning, because people will always protect themselves. And I think that is a human instinct that we are frightened when we make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. However, if you are a professional, when you take up that job role, you know that you have a responsibility to be honest. And I think sometimes the fear of repercussions overpowers that integrity. And so on that basis, people automatically lie. They automatically pass the buck. It wasn't them. They'll minimalise. And we do have to start being proactive to change that. We can see the battle that the post office ex-postmasters are having now and all what they're going through, and even the infected blood scandal. It's still an ongoing miscarriage of justice that those families are actively fighting against. I am hugely confident that a public accountability bill will start to work on changing that culture of closing ranks and protecting those that were at fault and passing the buck. I've been heavily involved with the Hillsborough Law since 2016, and I'm really, really passionate about it. I'm very confident. We did submit some amendments to the bill committee, and I hope that they do take them on board and add them in, because it will only strengthen the bill. But this is about making a change for the better and protecting the good people of our country, because as it stands, there are far too many people within our own country who have been massively failed and are still struggling to fight injustices now. So if I can, make that change following my own suffering, then I'll feel like I've achieved something.
Charlotte Hennessy, thank you so much for your time. And, just to say, it's really, upsetting in many ways, but also inspiring the way that you've clearly dealt with this situation of extreme adversity by campaigning. And it sounds like you've really done a lot of work to make sure that there will be greater justice, not just for the victims of this disaster, but, throughout the whole of Britain for similar disasters in the future. So, or, ideally to prevent them, of course. So thank you so much for joining us. Really, really do appreciate your time.
Oh, no, thank you very much for inviting me on.